When Ava looked out of her apartment window, no one was outside roaming the streets. The only things in motion were the large screens attached to the sides of the buildings, displaying advertisements for new technologies and products. The city was barren, and a gray light shone over everything. The activity in the apartment was similar. Every member of her family was situated in a separate room, completing their own separate tasks. Her parents were working from home in their offices. Ava and her siblings sat in their rooms, attending school through their laptops. No sound traveled through the apartment, and it would continue like this through the day. Ava would oftentimes ponder whether the world was ever different. Although she was satisfied with how her life was currently, she yearned to experience a world full of color and life instead of experiencing one of no color and dullness. She wished to obtain a glimpse of color from something other than the screens on the streets. The minuscule patches of grass outside were brown. The trees were sparsely scattered throughout the city, close to non-existent, and the inside of the apartment was devoid of any color besides the screens of the TVs and laptops. She hoped to see all of these things change for the better. These thoughts carried throughout the day and stayed in Ava's mind as she went to bed, carrying over into her dreams. Ava woke up in a place she didn't recognize, lying in a lumpy, uncomfortable bed. A heavenly scent wafted in from a different room, and Ava couldn't help but to walk towards it to find its source. To her surprise, she found her mother standing in the kitchen, cooking flat, circular pieces of dough on the stove. Her other house didn't contain a kitchen, and the meals she usually ate were prepackaged and came from a tube in the middle of her apartment. Everything about where she was appeared to be different from her normal way of life. The strangest thing about this new place, however, was the lack of technology she noticed. There were no screens in the building she was in, and nothing looked modern or new. Ava's mother smiled at her and ushered for her to sit down at the table. "Are you ready for your first day of school, Ava?" she asked. Ava stared back at her with confusion. "Yeah, sure. Where's my computer?" "I'm not sure what this computer thing what you're talking about is, but we don't have one," Ava's mother replied. "Now get ready while I finish making hot cakes." Ava trudged back into her room and looked in her drawers to find a few simple dresses. She thought it was strange to wear a dress to go to school, but she shrugged and put one on anyways. She returned to the kitchen to find that the hot cakes were finished and her siblings sitting at the table, already eating. She copied what they did and poured syrup on the food before eating. Ava was sitting in the back of a small room with several kids of various ages. The teacher, Miss Smith, stood in the front of the room going over class expectations. "We will start with a little review. On your slate boards, write the letters of the alphabet," she ordered. The other students picked up a piece of white chalk and started writing. Ava knew the letters of the alphabet, but she never had written them. Instead, she would typically type the words or speak them into the computer when she had to write for school. Lost in her thoughts, Ava didn't notice the teacher standing next to her with a ruler in her hands. Miss Smith hit Ava's hands, and she flinched away. "Write," the teacher demanded. Ava picked up the chalk and attempted to write out the letters. After a few minutes, she managed to do the task at hand. The rest of the day carried on in a similar manner, and Ava was glad when it ended. Once again, Ava had found herself in a place that she didn't recognize. This new place, however, was more similar to her old life than the place before. A laptop and a phone were set on a desk in the room. Both looked different from what she was used to, but she was relieved to see something familiar. Eager to know where she was, Ava opened up the laptop and looked at the date. It said January 15th, 2016. "How did I go back to the past?" she thought to herself. She peered out the window to get a glimpse of how different everything was years before she was born. The streets were busy with vehicles, and the sidewalks were filled with people walking, much different to how the streets have been before she somehow went to the past. Despite the streets teeming with life, the apartment was as quiet and as still as a rock. No footsteps were heard in the other room, the only noise discernible being the sound of her own breathing. Ava sighed as she walked out of the room in search of something to do. To her dismay, her siblings were sitting on the couch, both engrossed in their phone screens. "Do you want to go play outside?" she asked, the concept of going outside for fun new to her.
"After this video."
Morgan, Ava's younger sister, replied.
"And how long is it?"
her older brother Jimmy grumbled. Rebecca shot Jimmy a glare and shifted her gaze back to the video she had been watching. After nearly 20 minutes, Rebecca stood up from the couch, signifying that her video was finished.
Took you long enough,
Jimmy teased.
Shut up,
Morgan retorted, slapping Jimmy on the arm before walking to the doorway to put her shoes on. Ava and her siblings sat on a bench in the middle of Central Park. She watched the little kids running around with smiles on their faces. She had never seen anyone so happy and wanted to join in on the fun. One of the little kids seemed to read her thoughts and ran over to them. A little girl tapped on Ava's shoulder and asked, "Do you want to play tag?" Ava nodded her head enthusiastically. "How do you play?" she inquired. The little girl gave her a simple explanation and ran off to join back into the game. Ava followed, and her siblings weren't too far behind. As she ran away from the person who was it, she relished the feeling of the wind blowing through her blonde hair and how free running made her feel. She regretted not ever running before, and thought about many things that she had missed out on due to how much the world had changed. Over the next few hours, Ava and her siblings played several different games with the little kids until it was time to leave. She wanted to stay longer and wished that she could stay in the past forever. Part of her knew, however, that she would probably go someplace else soon after the day was over. Ava stood inside a white pod in the middle of the street. Other people on the street stood in similar pods as well, and the streets that surrounded her were thinner than they have ever been, and instead were taken up by additional skyscrapers. In the sky, a massive structure was getting built above the city, and a dark gray smog hung in the air. Ava could tell that she was in the future, this time, due to the amount of changes she saw compared to her old life. The pod transported her to her apartment. Before she could get out, she had to put on an oxygen mask. Her family members were wearing them too, due to the pollution snatching the previously plentiful oxygen from the air, making it impossible to live without the mask supplying oxygen. After placing the oxygen mask over her face, Ava stepped out of her pod onto the floor. Before she could go anywhere else, she fell down as a big bang shook the whole entire apartment, knocking off her oxygen mask in the process. She struggled to breathe, and as she was losing consciousness, her final thought was, "Is this the end?"